Hey everyone, Michelle Seidling here with another episode of Food Experience Unplugged. Today we'll explore the role of environment in helping you create healthy habits. Here to help us do that is environmental psychologist, well-being consultant, and functional life coach Lee Chambers. This podcast is available on multiple platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and others, as well as our website at foodexperienceunplugged.com. Please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform for new content as it becomes available. Please also check out our website at foodexperienceunplugged.com for some free resources as you begin your health journey. Lee Chambers, welcome to Food Experience Unplugged.
It's a pleasure to be on with you today, Michelle.
Oh, thanks for being here, Lee. We are so excited to have you as an environmental psychologist, and I can't wait to hear what exactly that is, and more importantly, how it can be used to build healthy habits. But to get started, will you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us what brought you to this point in your life and in your career?
I'll try and make it quick, Michelle. It's been a journey. So yeah, I was born in the north of England to a blue-collar family, and my parents worked hard. I was a curious and disruptive child, but always got good grades at school and managed to go through all the way to university and was the first one in my family to do so. I had some challenges at university around becoming more self-aware and struggling a little bit with my own emotional intelligence as a young man. But that kind of took me on a pathway where I struggled with my mental health, but ended up being taken home and then building myself back up, going to university and graduating. Trying to work out what I wanted to do as a career was always challenging because I've always had so many different interests. I actually ended up going into a graduate scheme in corporate finance, wanting to, in so many ways, change the world by, utilizing my skills with data and my skills with helping people. But that was in 2007 when I graduated, so it wasn't long before the economic crash took that career option away and left me thinking, right, what else can I do? I went back home and decided to start again, working in environmental services and efficiency management in local government while trying to figure out still what I wanted to do and bring to the world. I ended up launching a video game business, which became very successful and allowed me to do a lot of different qualifications beyond my university years, which was really powerful for me as I started to learn more about physiology and how that connected to neuroscience and psychology. I then became unwell in 2014, losing the ability to walk and had to relearn again, which really took me on a journey of self-discovery and understanding just how powerful suffering can be to help you grow as an individual. And that kind of takes me to where I am today, where I decided I wanted to really go deeper into the psychology of environments, understanding how environment had played a big part in my own recovery, but also because I really wanted to see how I could shape the world to help other people. And that kind of takes me to where I am today, where I founded a company called Essentialize, where we help and coach people through a process to help them to get more energy, more clarity on life, and be able to navigate the world in their own authentic way. And also a side of the company that helps businesses to look at their environments of their offices from both a physical and psychological perspective and how they impact on the well-being, the inclusivity, and the belonging of their employees.
Wow, that is an amazing journey in itself with your just different interests and your health challenge and your are you back to walking now? Are you back at, I don't know, 100% or close to now?
Yeah, so I can walk effectively. There are a few things physically that I can't do, but what I like to say is that I'm at 70% there physically, and that's probably the highest that I can get to, which I'm effectively 100% because of that. But I'm now mentally and emotionally 200% of the person that I was before I became unwell.
Wow, that is amazing. And that you mentioned it was chronic illness that caused your inability to walk, but you've overcome that and really um, is that where what kind of the health and wellness aspect of your interests lie in just trying to overcome that illness?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd done a lot around understanding physiology and psychology before my illness. What actually happened is after learning to walk again, that took 11 months to get back on my feet. And I was on immunosuppressant medication to suppress my immune system. And I decided that that wasn't something that I was happy to do long term. So, utilizing my knowledge and my experience, I decided to optimize. numerous different elements of my own life, from my nutrition to my sleep to my movement to my mindset, and actually decided, okay, so I want to become off medication. I don't want to be on medication for life. And it took me 5 years of experimenting, 5 years of documenting, 5 years of listening to my body and finding out exactly what energizes me, what I can tolerate, what drains me, what sets my inflammation off, to the point now where, as of summer this year, I'm medication free and controlling my disease by lifestyle alone.
Wow, that is amazing. That's just, I know it's a lot of work to figure out what's going to work for your body, but that's amazing that you were able to do that and not only being able to walk again, but also being free of medication and probably feels good physically and as well as mentally too.
Yeah, and it's all part of the journey, and I tend to see my journey as, just my own journey. But I am becoming more and more self-aware to the fact that other people can find that journey inspiring, and it's understanding that, not everyone will be able to get off the medication, and it's never about ultimately telling people that what you've done they should do, but if they can start to experiment, they'll definitely find ways to improve their own lives if they're willing to start to understand these things. And you know what? I think the biggest thing for me was not being off the medication itself, but how much I've been able to listen to my body through that tracking and practicing, and now how I can feel and listen to myself on such a deeper level, and I've got so much more acuity to understanding why I navigate the world the way that I do, how things make me feel, and any messages that my body's telling me.
Wow, that is really impressive, and just your resilience and your determination to overcome that. That is super important. Now, tell us about environmental psychology. What exactly it is? What interested you about it that you were got into that as a field, and how you're helping people with it?
Yeah, so people tend to think I've got an idea of what this is, but I'm not sure what it is. So can you explain it? So I've got to the point where the easiest way to help people understand what environmental psychology is to help people see the three main pillars that environmental psychologists work in. So the first one, and the area where I do the majority of my work, is environmental psychologists who look at human-made environments and how they impact on people's well-being, behaviors, beliefs, and interactions. So that's everything from office buildings to domestic homes to transport networks to city planning to access to nature, and looking at how all those human made aspects then impact the people who reside and live in those areas. Second pillar is environmental psychologists that work with nature interaction. So they look at how nature impacts us as human beings, how being in different ecosystems and being outdoors and in different outdoor environments changes how we interact, how we behave, how we think, and how we feel as humans. But also, they look at the relative interaction of how human beings then change their behaviors to nature the more time they spend in nature and the more times that they interact with nature, and how that makes them treat nature differently and have different environmental behaviors. The third section, probably the most interesting, the one that people really, really always want to know more about, is how to understand, modify, and project people's environmental behaviors. So they look specifically at things such as an environmental disaster. How does that impact how people perceive the world? How does that change people's actions in their daily lives? The favorite thing to look at is climate change, always to understand why one person in one house is incredibly scared of the future of climate change and their neighbour decided that it doesn't exist. And how you can have two people on such a wide spectrum of beliefs and behaviours, and how you can start to look to bring people to understand how and what is actually happening from a scientific perspective. And more often than not, people won't interact with research studies. In fact, they'll want it bringing down to a visual level that they can appreciate, whether it's a series of pictures, whether it's infographics, but they're actually looking, is it going to be punitive measures that stop people littering? Or are you going to make littering more appealing by making the bins a funny colour? Or are you going to help people to, come together and really appreciate the community more, and therefore the litter less? Or do you need people out picking litter to shame people to do the same or to inspire people to do the same. And looking at how, social norms, group theory, social proof, psychodynamics affect people's environmental behaviors and how we can shape those for the future so the planet is in a better condition because our planet's health is reflective of our own health.
Interesting. That is a wide variety within environmental psychology. That's impressive. Now, in your work, do you address all of those things, or are there certain aspects of environmental psychology that you like to focus on?
So my main focus is on looking at human-made environments and how they impact our well-being. So that's kind of my specialist area, and a lot of that revolves around looking at workplaces. So the thing with environmental psychology is, on its own, it doesn't really exist. It's a very multidisciplinary field. So from a workplace perspective, I might potentially be working with an architect at the very initial point of a building design. But then I might be working with the board of directors as they look to sign things off. I might be then working with facilities as they look at how they're going to install and implement. And then I'm potentially working with the end users and external agencies who are bringing all this impact and actually delivering this project. So you're never truly working in a very narrow sliver. And that interconnectedness really makes me enjoy my work because I have to, navigate a lot of different people with different mindsets. And I have to understand how they work and what they want to get out of the project. So I enjoy that section. But what I really enjoy is working with the end users to create physical and psychological spaces that are beneficial to their well-being. So being able to go into an office and looking at things such as lighting, ventilation, acoustics, density, and just understanding how these impact people differently, because every employee has a different environmental need. So we start to actually, talk with employees, what are the things in design that affect them every day? Because more often than not, they are the best source of data for what is, what's not optimal and what is optimal, because they're willing to point it out if you go to them for quantitative and qualitative feedback. So for me, it involves going into a workspace and looking and seeing, right, okay, what type of roles are carried out here? What are your employers saying that is, does it flow for them? Does it feel congruent to the type of work that they do? Are they in a place where they can collaborate effectively where they need to, but still be able to get the space to work, on their own bits when they need to without distraction? Because again, as office design has moved over the years, it doesn't always take into account these things. And office design, more often than not, it'll go through to an architect who has learned a number of design schools and has one they favour. And they quite like to design something that's very portfolio specific or it's very brief specific. They'll take it to a board who are looking at a number of different factors, but they just want it to tick the boxes that they need to pass it on to the financiers who want it within a certain budget and the facilities who want it, want it to be completed in a certain time. And quite often the end user is not engaged in those processes. But they are the ones who may spend 8 hours a day, maybe more, in that environment. So as I look to move forward now, obviously, there's a lot more people working remotely. So I'm helping people to look at their homes, how they can partition off workspaces, how they can create environments, within the domestic area that they live, reside, and trying to make the best out of that to try and create some psychological separation, to try and schedule and bring some anchors back in. Because by being outside of an office environment, you do lose certain interaction opportunities and certain elements of collaboration.
Absolutely. I love that. I love just the whole building that environment and individualizing it or customizing it, if you will, to the user and to the organization, and then in the home especially. Now, here in at Food Experience Unplugged, we talk about a lot of building healthy habits and the importance of environment in doing that. Will you take a minute and what exactly is the role of environment in creating habits, whether you're creating healthy eating habits or working on your career or some other aspect of your health?
Yeah, I mean, the environment is massive. It really plays a pivotal factor in looking to implement habits because, especially in the implementation phase, our environment shapes our interaction. So what you actually want to do is, a lot of our interaction is visual. So we've got environmental cues in our vision all day, every day. And a great example is the environmental cues of the current pandemic. All of a sudden, we're getting cued by spacing stickers, by dispensing stations, by masks and barriers, and all these different things that remind us every single day that there's a pandemic, there's something out there, it's dangerous. When it comes to actually building habits, it's really important that we start to consider visibility. So a big thing about environments is if you want to, say, start eating and cooking for yourself, then make these things visible. So you know what? Leave your pan on the side. It's a trigger for you to cook. It's so simple. But a lot of things that we tend to keep hidden away, if you create an extra barrier, then that extra barrier might be opening a cupboard and having to find it. But the massive part of environment is make it easy. So make it easier, make it more accessible. If you want to start to implement that habit, have those items that you need there at eye level, close by, where you will use them, and build your environments around ensuring that you stay consistent because you're continually being triggered by it. So make it easy and accessible, make it visible in your environment. It's the same thing if you want to eat healthy and you want to remove certain foods from your house, remove them. The worst thing to do is to put them in a really obvious place in your environment. Every time you walk through the kitchen, you'll be triggered to open that cupboard because you know it's there. It becomes forbidden, and then it becomes attractive and engageable. And really, so often we are creatures of habit, but we can shape those. We are incredibly neuroplastic, but we just need to give ourselves a little bit of a helping hand. And actually, it's really important that when we build our environments around shaping our habits, we also build an environment that creates a level of reward for completing our habit. And it's starting to understand that we can shape an environment to do that. There are so many triggers, there's so much stimulation that we face as human beings every day. In fact, they say in comparison to our ancestors, we are physiologically and psychologically not very different than 10, 20, 40, 100,000 years ago. But now we live in this world where we're continually stimulated by things. We don't embrace boredom anymore. And our environments are designed to constantly stimulate and entertain us. And then suddenly, when all that drops, you find yourself in the fridge because suddenly you triggered to eat by stimulation. You want some sensory stimulation. You're not hungry. And it's about actually thinking, can we start to build our environments to disconnect, to actually desensitize us a little bit? And by having more natural environments, more natural elements in our house, whether it's the biophilic design of certain aspects, or whether we have more plants, a landscape picture that we can just look at and just relax. And so often it's actually about creating somewhere where we feel settled. Because if you feel settled, you're less likely to indulge in the bad habits that you're looking to avoid, that are holding you back, and more likely to engage in the good ones that actually make you feel better. Because what we do as human beings is so often driven by our current feeling. And if your environment is making you feel unsettled, is making you feel stressed, is making you feel anxious, is overstimulating you, then you will more likely to fall back into your bad habitual patterns, especially if your environment has left them accessible.
Wow, I love that. And you spoke a lot about triggers and just recognizing it. A lot of times it's more, I wouldn't say subliminal, but it's more people aren't as aware of it as they could or should be. Are there some things, how can people become more aware of those triggers or of those habits or things that they can or need to change in their environment to really help move toward whatever habit they're trying to build?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways, but as you well allude to, the first way to start to understand is to become aware, because we have all these autopiloted behaviors that all of a sudden you find yourself somewhere and you're like, have I just done this? And starting to build that awareness. Again, there are ways to do that environmentally, and like there's all sorts of interesting ways to do it. But we've got to think like I've suggested and seen before, people putting certain things in the kitchen that then trigger them to make themselves ask a question. And
Mm,
when we question ourselves, we become so much more aware because suddenly we switch on trying to find an answer.
mm,
And the ability to utilize questions in environments, or it's almost some ways to put barriers to give us a bit more time to become aware before we hit that point where uh, we get to a point where we're suddenly doing things that we don't want to do. But when we look at health behaviors, what's really pivotal is understanding that if we have a really abstract why, we will fall to the impulsivity of being human.
mm,
And when we have a why that has a really long delay, so we are trying to, eat better so that I will look good on the beach in 2 years' time. The delay
mm,
is so long, your impulsivity will take over at some point, and you're likely to, in a lot of ways, likely to lose the habit that you're trying to build. Because really, our motivation to do things as human beings, really, we put a value on something and have an expectancy of what we're going to get from it. And if the delay is too long and the impulsivity is too hot, we'll end up doing the things that we don't want to do, and more often than not, we'll do that and then negatively give ourselves a less than compassionate word afterwards, which
mm,
then takes us more often than not on a spiral of why am I doing this? I don't want to do it. Going against what I'm telling myself. Well, that's how I feel. I feel bad. I'm going to do it again. And yeah, what we actually need is to start to anchor in a bit more to a less abstract and a more concrete why. And it can be something as, when I cook and eat this nutritious food, I feel better. It's there's no impulsivity there. There's no delay. You feel better now by
mm,
cooking and eating that nutritious food, and being able to accept that more and stop looking to these massive outcomes, but actually celebrating the small wins along that process. And little environmental cues such as having a calendar where you mark off every time you complete your habit. Well, you'll get a little streak going, and suddenly you'll feel like, whoa, I don't want to break that streak. Put it somewhere visible, and suddenly it's yet another trigger for you to do the thing that you're saying you're going to do. And truth be told, when you've got a strong understanding of what it's doing for you now, and you can anchor into it's becoming the person that you want to be, it starts to bleed into your identity that this is you, a person who cooks nutritious food and eats it because I want to look after the body that I've got. That will then prompt and trigger you not to be like, I don't feel like it today. What will trigger first is I want to become this person. This is the person I'm becoming. Therefore, my actions will be I will cook that food and eat it and feel good. And my feelings will be I've said I'm going to become this person and I've done it. So actually, I feel great because I'm fulfilling my desires and my wishes rather than doing it inversely, like so many of us do. I feel bad. Therefore, my actions are eat the chocolate in the cupboard. And then I'm looking at myself thinking, I'm not becoming who I want to become and feeling disenfranchised.
mm. Wow. I love that. I love the why, the really a focused why, and sounds like more of a short-term why. You've got kind of some goal in the distance, but having those short-term whys seem to really make a difference as well.
Yeah, it's the human impulsivity is hard to counteract, but if you can cool it and give yourself something that's tangible now, we all want a shortcut. We all want to be instant gratification. That's part of our human psychology because we had to take advantage of opportunities for moments of gratification when, we lived in a world where they came very, very rarely. Now, instant gratification can be done with the swish of an eye and the click of a button, and we need to sometimes harness that impulsivity to get it to do what we want because everything is a tool, and a tool can be used for our benefit or our detriment, and we've just got to ensure that when we're looking to build positive habits, let's use all the tools that you've got to your benefit towards achieving and integrating this habit into your daily life, because if you value it and you actually get benefit from it, suddenly it becomes a non-negotiable. It becomes you. And when you get to that point, it's incredibly powerful.
Yes, definitely. Now, just backing up for a minute, you mentioned asking yourself questions or prompting questions. like when you were in the kitchen, for example, or doing something else. Will you explain a little bit about what you mean by that with the questions and how that's important?
Yeah, so as human beings, when we're on autopilot, we literally go around like a little robot just doing things. And it's the same thing where you're supposed to be driving somewhere and then you set off and you just dropped into autopilot and suddenly ended up on the road to somewhere else completely different because you just desensitized and switched off. But yeah, if you ask yourself a question, so the questions are generally very, very simple, but it's a question that triggers you. So it's sometimes better that we actually start to play with our own questions and find a certain question that works for us. So a lot of what I suggest to my clients is using, you know, if then implementation intentions. So ask yourself, what if I go and eat all that chocolate? Then I will feel this way. Or inversely, what if I go and cook myself a healthy stew? Then I will feel great because I know it makes me feel good, and I know that that's what I want to do. And sometimes it's questions like, you're just there, like, what next? So that's a really good one. Suddenly you walk into the kitchen on autopilot and you just ask yourself, what next? And then you just have to stop and think what you're doing next.
Mhm.
And it's like literally you could put on your fridge like, what next? You walk past and you'll be, what next? And then it trigger loops you into thinking, right, okay, so what am I actually doing? am I present doing something? Because what's really interesting is if you go into the kitchen to go and make a cup of coffee and you know that's what you're doing, you will walk past that and not be triggered because you've
Mhm.
already got a what next in your brain. But if you walk in on autopilot and see that, you will actually stop and think because you haven't got a next. That's cognitively, it's
Mm.
like you literally, you are working from the ancient parts of your brain that are like, okay, let's walking around like Pac-Man. But but it gets to the point where we can trigger ourselves by asking ourselves a whole host of different questions. And what's interesting is it's something that you need to ultimately experiment with because questions land differently depending on culture, depending on our understanding, and actually depending on how much words trigger us. And
Mm.
it's a real part of utilizing our own self talk to our own benefit when it comes to sustaining healthy habits. Because you can almost ask yourself, what if questions? What if I do it? And
Mm.
then what questions? And those implementation scenarios are powerful because you can use them to make rational decisions even when you've decided to disengage.
Mm. I love that. I love just kind of taking a step back and reflecting on what you want, and then almost motivating yourself, like with the what if questions. That's kind of motivating you to decide whether or not to do a certain thing or not, and what kind of consequences will happen because of it, or developing good habits. That's super. I love the question and the prompt. That's very powerful. Now, do you have any examples? Are there some success stories maybe you could share of people that you've worked with, or you work with a variety of different groups or and people? Is there something where these things that you're talking about with questions, with the why, all of those things that has worked in their lives?
Yeah, so almost everyone that I've worked with has had some kind of, transition period where they become more empowered by asking themselves questions or, shaping their environments towards their goals. So naturally, we work with people in a target driven way. But initially, what we do is actually dig a lot deeper into their goals and ambitions to find out why they've selected those and are they truly what they want. So having that really defined goal that's been really chiseled and is coming from a place of values, from a place of identity, from a place of purpose, it really gives people some, tangible something really to attach to push forward. And then utilizing, these things such as questioning, we've got people to start exercising, people to start running who beforehand they'd probably give themselves, four excuses why they wouldn't go. It's wet, my knees will get sore. I've not got trainers that fit. And all of a sudden you get them to, change this methodology by asking themselves these questions, but also utilizing a lot of the habitual and behavior changing modifications that people can make, such as, suddenly the trainers will be there. They might actually start by just putting those trainers on, standing outside, coming back in. They've started something. It's really important that when we look at these things, my methodology is small compounding changes over time incrementally become significant changes. So by starting so small, by making, their exercise equipment visible. So often it's dusty, it's hidden away. By having those utensils there, and then suddenly utilizing prompts and looking at ways, we've had people who've lost 5 stone in weight and suddenly gone back out dating again and become confident. I've had people who've decided to actually get back into exercising and completed marathons from a place where when I initially started working with them, they did virtually no exercise. And we've had people who've gone on to change careers significantly, find completely different visions and passions. One gentleman that I worked with recently, he's found that actually he was in a job in IT that he didn't enjoy. Now he's applied for a visa to move to Australia to work in construction in an industry and a job that actually he's always wanted, but he's never been able to tangibly step outside of his comfort zone and look to attain. And that all comes through small changes and helping them to empower and enable the ability to ask themselves more powerful questions. Because, truth be told, Michelle, everyone already has the answers inside of themselves. The answers to what their concrete why is, their answer to what their impulsivity is. It's just about helping and assisting people to start to ask more powerful questions so they can start to find the answers that are actually true to them inside. Because education teaches us to find answers more often than not. And you get your answers on a piece of paper and move through to the next phase of life. But the real power when it comes to changing habits is the ability to find deeply inside why you behave the way that you do, shape your environment so that it's beneficial to every aspect of what you're trying to achieve, and then learn and practice asking yourself more powerful questions. So even when you fall off the course of what you're trying to do, it doesn't suddenly become this perfectionism spiral where everything is gone. We actually look more at, okay, so I've made something that, isn't what I wanted, but I've managed to consistently move much further than I did before. And actually, I can just get straight back on course. Sometimes it just requires a question.
And a very powerful question at that, too. I love the example of just the individual who, moved to Australia to really seek out his passion and his career. And sometimes it takes, a big environmental change like that, moving to a different location. But other times you're making smaller changes, like changes within your home or putting out uh, pans or other kitchen utensils or exercise equipment, such a wide range of environmental changes. That's
Yeah.
super, super important and really interesting as those little prompts can really help you.
Yeah, and it's from an employer perspective, that work as well has created some significant changes in a lot of different, key performance indicators, but more importantly for me, key happiness indicators. And a number of the clients I've worked with, they've had reduced staff turnover, they've had reduced sickness, reduced conflict, reduced mistakes and errors, and then increases on things, such as employee engagement and morale, increased productivity because they've actually, created a workplace that people feel more comfortable to work productively in. And generally speaking, just better workplace cultures and places where people feel like they're valued. And that's so important when it comes to people taking, accountability and, transferring authority for their own behaviors to themselves. Because if you feel that you're being heard, that you're being valued, that you're cared about, you'll take better care of yourself.
Yes, that's super true, and I love that. It's really I like with the what you mentioned with the work environment, particularly because often we think of okay, the airflow or the size of the little cubicle or office space, but it sounds like it's also a lot of employee interaction and engagement informs that environment as well as those physical things.
Yeah, it's a real synergy of the physical and the psychological, and they're very powerful when you look at them both in collaboration together. Because everything from on the physical side, from light to ventilation to noise, impacts people. then on the psychological side, how they feel while they're there, how they interact with other workers, how they feel that they're included, how accessible things are. All that together ultimately comes together to, ultimately build your employee to become the person that they are. And they're not just an employee, they're a human being. And truth be told, you can get the best out of human beings when you give them the conditions to thrive.
Absolutely, and just having those conditions, they can use it as, or customize it as they need to form that environment. That's huge, very, very important. Now, what are you kind of alluded to a little bit, but what are some steps that people can take if they're just kind of becoming aware of their environment, or maybe they're not even right now, just to that people can take to create an environment that's conducive to building whatever habits they're doing, whether they're at home, whether they're in an office space or other environment. Are there some things that people can do, concrete to get started?
Yeah, I said the best place for people to get started is to really define what they're looking to achieve and then use that as a basis to start to shape their environment. So, a lot of us live in environments that, there's a lot of stimulation, there's a lot of items, belongings. For some people, that can be beneficial. Some people thrive among the chaos of an environment. There are those, and God bless them, those people who can do that. But there are people that can, and it's really your own individual journey. But if you're looking to create an environment that's going to be beneficial to you, you have to take the mantle to design it and design it with intention. So we quite often will pick wallpaper because we like how it looks, but start to think about the color of that room and how it impacts your emotions, because everything has an impact on us as human beings. We absorb so much from our environment. So the real starting point is to define what you're looking to achieve, and then you can start to build an environment from there. It's always important to realize that we don't live in an environment alone as a separate entity. We are in an ecology full of other human beings. But there's a real power in starting to look, can I remove some clutter so things are more clear? There's more clarity there. What am I looking to achieve? Can I have those things more accessible, easier to hand? Can I ensure that I start to actually, okay, so I need to stock up on fruits and vegetables. How can I design my fridge so that I can see what I need to get what's missing? Can I utilize the containers so I know that I open the fridge, I can see I need mushrooms, I need peppers, and start to think, make it something that's visually a cue, right? I need to restock on these things to cook. Make a plan. Really start to plan what your meals are going to be. Because if we look at our habits and our environments, if you can't see what the next stage of the plan is, you'll default to that old comfort food and the easy thing to make. And truth be told, eating well is never the easiest thing to do if you've not prepared. There'll always be something that's easier, more quicker, and more convenient. And we as human beings, we are a bit of a sucker for comfort. But comfort is the antithesis of growing and moving towards the habits that you want. Because really anything that you truly want is just a little bit of hard work. It's a little bit harder. Someone on this planet will try to make it easier and will charge you for the privilege. So it's about being a bit more aware about that and just ensuring that you've got what you need in your environment to achieve the goals, that they are at the forefront, that they are easily accessible, and you know what? It's actually quite fun when you dig into it because it's what you want, and it's what you want, and you're making it easy to get what you want. You're actually making your life more comfortable at the same time.
Definitely. I love that. And just those small things to really trigger you and question and motivate you to, to feel comfortable. We tend to gravitate, we call it comfort food, but maybe you don't feel as comfortable as you could if you're, eating a little bit better, or if you think about exercise or other habits, just kind of what will help you to feel comfortable and to motivate you toward that habit. That's fantastic. I love that.
Oh yeah, and a big thing about working from home is it gives you the access to your cooking facilities at dinner. Why don't you go and cook at dinner? You can cook with the people you might be with if you're working from home with others. It can become an activity. You can make food for other people and have the satisfaction of having them enjoy it as well. and you can fill your whole house with the delicious smell of spices. And yeah, it's a really positive dinner time activity if you decide to cook, because it's mindful. You get to chop and prepare, you get to be in the moment, you get to disconnect from work. And even better, when you do reconnect to work, you'll be nourished, and you'll have had some proper time to desensitize, so you can reconnect to work more strongly in the afternoon.
Excellent point. Yes, and just having all that availability right there. What better thing than to take advantage of that to your benefit and to your health. Oh. Well, Lee, how can people get in contact with you?
So the best way for people to get in contact with me is at my website, which is essentialize.co.uk or leechambers.org. And on both of those websites, you'll find my services, my blog, and my social media handles.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we will include all of those things in the show notes. And Lee, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate the your knowledge of environmental psychology and really being able to take a deep dive into what matters and making those changes. It's super important, and just kind of getting people to think, and that what if is very, very powerful. So thank you so much for being here today, Lee.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Michelle.